Wireless mic, that means I get to sing. And I only know one church song, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. Come on. My wife knows, man, at my funerals, my grandkids better sing that song, the clean version. Yeah. He knows. Well, it's awesome to be here tonight. Let me introduce my bride. She has not been able to be here. She's been with her parents as they're struggling with some health issues in the eastern part of Carolina. And so it just worked out. It originally wasn't going to work out this way. I was going to fly home on Thursday, but she's here tonight. I want to introduce her. We've been married for 38 years. You can clap. That's okay. Come on. 38 years. We'll just leave it at that. And we have one daughter, one son-in-law. He's a youth pastor in North Dallas. We have three grandkids, no great-grandkids. She's much too young for that, but she's going to be coming in just a second, and she's going to share with you a part of our story. And let me give you a disclaimer tonight before I tell you our story. Don't think that because there was a bad thing that happened at youth camp, I'm a youth camp proponent. I believe in youth camp with all of my heart. Our goal is to take 65 students to youth camp in a few weeks. I believe youth camp changes the lives of students, young men, young ladies. My wife gave her life to ministry at the youth camp you're going to hear about tonight. So I'm all in on youth camp. Amen? I don't know what you guys do. Y'all go to youth camp? Yeah. If you want to go to a good youth camp, come to Texas. Everything's bigger and better in Texas. I didn't say it was much better than Florida, but it is, yeah. Well, this is a real-life story about a week of camp that we experienced. Some have asked about the movie. You can find it on YouTube. You can go to eBay. It's called The Flood, Who Will Save Our Children? And one of the things that we did with the people who produced that movie is they said, now listen, if you sit down with us, we can do an accurate movie. I learned something about the media. You can't trust the media. The first half of this movie is it's a mess. But the second half is pretty factual. They use real footage from that day. And here's the title of what we're going to talk about today. And that's the reason why we just sang that song. We sing that song. We can almost sing that song from memory. We sing it at funerals. But tonight I want to tell you, in our lives, it really is amazing grace for real. Because I believe with all of my heart in the sovereignty of God. That's a big word that means God's in control of everything. And so you're going to hear that tonight in this story. But here's what I want to do. I want us to pray, and then after I pray, we're going to watch a video clip that was done by a news station in San Antonio, Texas, about this event. Because it's hard. You'll be able to visualize when I start talking to you about water that was traveling at 70 miles an hour. You'll see what it did to a bus 1 mile down the river. It destroyed a 72-passenger bus. I didn't know that about water. I'm from Florida. We have Rock Springs and Wekiva Springs, and they're just circular. I never had any idea about what water can do until this event. So let's pray. We're going to watch the video, and then I'm going to tell you our story. It's our God story. Everybody has a God story. Yours may be different than ours, but listen, you want to win people to Jesus, just tell them your God story, because everybody's got one if you're a believer in Jesus Christ. Father, in Jesus' name, I thank you tonight that we get to tell our story, but bigger than that, God, we get to tell your story of an incredible, amazing grace that changed people's lives. On a day that was difficult, on 10 days of funerals, God, that were difficult, there are still people coming to Christ because of this story. And I thank you for that. I thank you for a church that has a vision to reach out in the community and allow this story to be shared. And so, Father, I pray blessings on everything that's said and done. And we're going to give you all the honor and glory. In Christ's name we pray. And everybody said? Amen. You said that like you're at an opera. Everybody said? Amen. Yeah, you guys that are guests, man, we going to have some fun, all right? Because we're in God's house, and God's people ought to be happy people. All right? So watch this video, then I'll come back.
I was there that afternoon, but the crew in Chopper 5 was one of the first on the scene that morning. Tonight, former Koons 5 photographer David Villarreal shares his story of how he and others tried to save people but couldn't save them all.
As we were flying up there, we got the river. It wasn't until we saw that the bus was in the water that we realized the magnitude of the story. At that time, we're just a news-gathering helicopter. We're there just to take video, take pictures, and picked up a firefighter with a rope and became a rescue helicopter in a matter of seconds. And we're able to save 2 of the girls that were in the water. There were 40 in the bus total. I think 10 didn't survive. You'll never forget that face of Melanie Finley in the water. I mean, we got that close to getting her. I put my camera down after the firefighter had jumped in and left the rope kind of hanging on the side. I had to put my camera down. And in some of the shots, you can see where our camera's still recording as I'm throwing the rope to Melanie. Running low on fuel, getting close to the trees, we had to make the decision to go get some more fuel, and we didn't have any more time to pick her up. And it wasn't until we landed back at the airport that we found out that another helicopter had her in the air when she let go of the rope and didn't survive. Never forget, you know, especially the faces of those kids in the water. That just always something I'll always remember as long as I live. And it's amazing that so much time has gone by, and I can still vividly remember everything as it happened that day.
I was there that afternoon, but the crew in Chopper 5 was one of the first on the scene that morning. Tonight, former Koons 5 photographer David Villarreal shares his story of how he and others tried to save.
Here's what Jesus said in John chapter 15. He said this, "These things have I spoken unto you," and I think this will be on the screen, "that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full." Then he said this in verse number 12. "This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you." Now listen to verse 13. "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if you do whatsoever I command you." When Levon and I went to this little town called Box Springs, which is right next door to where your pastor's wife grew up, right, Mesquite. Box Springs is called Zip City because people zip through there to get to Dallas. It's just it's a bedroom community of Dallas, and we went there, and our first Sunday we had 13 kids, and within 6 months, on Wednesday nights, we're averaging 100 students on Wednesday nights. God blessed our church and our student ministry more than you could ever imagine. And God gets all the glory for that. And so they had not gone to camp in a pretty good while at that church. And so we began to make plans to go to camp. The camp is called Pot of Gold. It's about 60 miles southwest of San Antonio, Texas. It's in what's called the Hill Country in Texas. And here's the deal. Being from Florida, I had no idea about flash floods. I did not understand what rivers could do. I didn't understand what a low water crossing was. And so we took off for camp, and here's what's crazy. We had a bus and a 15-passenger van, and on the morning that we were going to go to camp, our daughter, who was 5 years of age, there were so many kids that showed up at the last minute that our worship pastor's wife said, "Hey, Brooke can stay with us." And that was a decision that we later found out was a pretty good decision on our part. But we went to camp, had a great week at camp. The camp that we're talking about, here's what's crazy about it. It overlooks the very river that you saw there. Here's what you got to understand about the river that day. When we went to camp on Monday morning, the river was about knee deep. It's called the Guadalupe River. What you saw in that video, those were tops of trees 30 to 35 feet high. You can still go back there today and look up in those trees, and you can still see debris from that day. That river, that was a tranquil river, when it went out of its banks, was traveling at 70 miles an hour. That's an incredible force. And so when we went to camp, we had a great week at camp. We had some kids that came to Christ. We had some young men that gave their lives to ministry. The tabernacle set up on top of the hill. It overlooked the Guadalupe River. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. We've been back there many times. I've had the privilege to go back and speak at this camp. So we went to camp, and on Thursday night, what the tradition is before everybody went to bed, you stayed up late and you watched a movie. That's the last thing you did. And we're watching. It had not rained all summer or all week at our camp. A good friend of ours, we call him Brother D, had been at camp about 3 weeks earlier, and it had rained all week. And so what we didn't know was the ground was saturated. And so on Thursday night, it began to rain. And on Friday mornings, here's what we usually would do. You get up, you go to breakfast, you go to one last chapel, you get your trophies, you boo the other churches that you beat, because that's what you do at camp, right? And we actually won a volleyball trophy. And so, but it was different that morning. They came to our dorms, and they said, "You guys, we all going to get up, and we're going to take the evacuation route out of camp. We're going to line our buses and our vans up, and we're going to go out the evacuation route." Now, the evacuation route that day is different than what it is now. On that day, you left the camp, you went down, and it took you parallel to the Guadalupe River. Now, what we didn't know was up 30 miles up the river in a town called Kerrville as they open up the floodgates. So now there's creating a perfect storm. And here's the deal. Here's what I want you to grab: the sovereignty of God, because it's the sovereignty of God that helped us get through what we went through. Because here's what happened on that morning. And not to go into all the details, but we were the second bus in line. There were about 19 buses and vans that were lined up to take the evacuation route. Before it was all said that morning, we went from being the number 2 bus in line to being the next to last bus and van, only 2 buses behind us. And that's really, really important to understand. And so we began to take the evacuation route out of camp. We came down. We made the turn to go parallel to the river. The bus in front of us encountered a little bit of water. When we made the turn, I was driving the bus. When we turned, that's when it was like a wall of water came out of its banks, and it stalled our bus. Now, Pastor Tommy can relate to this probably. I was a youth pastor. Youth pastors are pretty low on the totem pole. You didn't know that. You probably learned that. And here's all I could think about. Because I'm from Florida, I don't know what rivers can do. I don't have any clue about what's about to happen. And here's my concern. How am I going to explain to my pastor how I could not get a bus started? How am I going to get this bus back to Dallas, 6 hours from San Antonio? Well, the bus did stall. The bus began to rise. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw our 15-passenger van that was now halfway underwater. If in that video I talked to you about a guy named Scott who went to camp who had leukemia, he had a port in his chest. In that video, a couple times they showed him hanging onto a tree without a shirt and no hair because he'd lost his hair because of chemo. When I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw that van halfway underwater, I saw a young lady. Her name was Legina. It was her 16th birthday, and she was the first young lady swept down the river. And her buddy Scott, with leukemia, with the port, jumped in the water, tried to rescue her. Now the water is beginning to really rise, and I notice now that the van is halfway underwater. And so again, not knowing how bad this situation is, I simply say to our kids and to Lavonda, we'll get off the bus and we'll walk over, we'll just wade in the water over this really, really, really big tree. And here's what I figured out pretty quick. There were more people than there was tree. And again, here's the deal. Here's what the National Transportation Safety Board said. Not because I was smart. I thought we were going to get off the bus, wade over to the tree, because there was dry land. The National Transportation Safety Board said if we wouldn't have got off the bus, every person in the bus and van would have died that day. Was because you saw the picture of the bus. That bus went 1 mile down the river. The van went further than that, and it literally crushed that bus. And so we got off the bus, and we made our way over to the tree. We could not all get in the tree, and so I just said, I'm going to let go. I didn't know where Lavonda got to. She was in that tree initially, and then it just began to take you down the river. I want to take a moment, and I want to tell you about a couple young men who are going to be seniors in high school. These guys were not only leaders at the school, they were incredible leaders in our group. The first guy I want you to see, his name is Mike. There's Mike. Mike played center and middle linebacker on the football team. He was the only guy in our district to go all district. We called him the Manster. He was this amazingly big guy. As a matter of fact, all that summer, he and I were working out because he thought I needed to look better, be stronger, be a fit youth pastor. And so we worked out. As a matter of fact, the week before we went to youth camp, we had VBS, and Mike served as the villain every day in our drama. Here's the cool thing about Mike. Mike was raised by a single mom who was later adopted by a guy named Alan. But every Saturday morning, regardless if we won or lost the football game, Mike was at the church. Mike could not drive a bus, but Mike served as a bus captain and went out every Saturday morning to pick up or to visit boys and girls. And he was there every Sunday morning to go on that bus, not go to the doors, and bring boys and girls to church. We had a really, really big bus ministry back in the day. That guy right there became a hero that day. And by every indication and every measurement, he could have been saved that day. But you see, because of where a barbed wire fence was, there was a barbed wire fence, and there were middle school kids who could not get over that barbed wire fence. And on that day, going into his senior year, being recruited by a lot of football schools, Mike held down a barbed wire fence so the middle school kids could get across the barbed wire fence. May I say to you tonight, that's exactly where they found Mike's body. Greater love have no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. And those middle school kids said about that guy at his funeral, and for weeks and months to come, that guy saved my life. Hey, I'm going to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of times, a lot of places, our students get a bad rap. Thank God for good kids. Thank God for your kids that you love and you bring to church. Can I just tell you, though, we never know what tomorrow holds. And so, and again, I still don't understand how fast this water's traveling. Because now I let go of the tree and I begin to go down the river because I'm going to swim to another tree. Can I tell you that on that day there were guys that could swim like Mike who did not survive? And we had some kids that went to camp who couldn't swim, who survived that day. It all goes back to the sovereignty of God. And so when I let go of that tree and I began to go down the river at 70 miles an hour, that's a sight, but you just don't get that visual in your head. And I began to go down that river and I saw a tree. And by now it's a pretty panicky time because I'm figuring out pretty quick, this thing is taking me wherever it wants to take me. And I saw a tree, and there was 3 or 4 or 5 kids holding on to a branch. And I remember one student. Any high school kids in here? High school kids can be cruel, y'all. Because here's what this kid says. He looks at his other buddies over the roar of the water because they don't understand how bad it is. And here's what they said. Oh, no. Now, my nickname's Whitey, okay, so don't panic. They said, oh, no, it's Brother Whitey. He's coming right at us. I look like a missile going down the river. And I grabbed a hold of that branch. And here's what I remember about that day, y'all. The roar of the water was so loud. And we were holding on to the branch. We could not get in the tree. We've been fighting the water now because we're facing the water. It's just coming at us at 70 miles an hour. We're holding on for dear life. And imagine a 72-passenger bus coming at your tree backwards. You see, I like your pastor, have been to seminary. Can I tell you, there's no class, there's no professor who ever taught us what to do if a 72-passenger bus is coming down the river. And one of the kids said, Brother Whitey, what are we going to do? And all I could say was, listen, if that bus hits our tree and it knocks our tree down, we'll ride the tree down the river. Because I had no idea what was about to happen. But it hit our tree backwards, and it was up out of the water. And one of our kids had climbed up on the bus, and he was rocking back and forth. And I said, Wesley, you got to climb, buddy. That's the only way we're going to get in the top of that tree. Because we can't hold on here much longer. So he climbed up, and a couple more kids climbed up, and you couldn't trade places. The water was all you could do is pull yourself forward. And so some of us got up in the tree, and we had a kid that got in the tree. His name was Charlie. Charlie was 6'6" and weighed about 120 pounds. Not much for a power forward, but he had long jeans. So one of the things we did was we took our jeans off and we made a rope to be able to reach down the water and get more kids up in the tree. And we got everybody up but 2. And again, it was just how you were on the deal. One of those girls was Tara, who was rescued where Lavonda was. The other girl was the girl you saw her face in the water. Her name was Melanie. Melanie had been in the water for a long time. And Melanie began to pull herself up, but she couldn't hold on. We couldn't get the rope to her. Now, I want you to listen very, very carefully, because this is one of the most profound statements I probably will ever hear in my life. Over the roar of the water, because you see because they lived in Mesquite, and back in Mesquite, her mom went to church, her brother went to church, but her dad didn't go to church. And I want you to listen to what she says as she's holding on for dear life. Before she lets go of that branch, she looks up over the roar of the water, and here's what she says. Now, she's a sophomore in high school. She looks at me and she says, Brother Whitey, if I don't make it, you tell my parents I love them and I'll see them in heaven. Can I tell you, that's incredible faith right there. And if you're here tonight and you don't have that kind of faith, if you don't know where you're going to spend eternity, if you're in that situation, can I just tell you, you either go to heaven or a real place called hell. And Melanie was so in love with her mom and her dad and her brother. She's so concerned about her dad. She looked up over the roar of the water, about to let go to go down a river that she didn't know about. And she said, if I don't make it, you tell my parents I love them and I'll see them in heaven. And she was gone. And then we saw Melanie go up over some trees. We saw her go over, and we began to cheer, and we began to celebrate because we thought Melanie had been rescued. And unfortunately, Melanie was in the water, and she was hit by debris. And the way she was rescued was different than the way we were rescued, and she went up over the trees, and she couldn't hold on any longer, and she fell to her death. But may I just tell you that her daddy came to Christ later. And I believe with all of my heart, he never got into church, and I believe with all of my heart it's because of what she said, the last thing she said to anybody. If I don't make it, you tell my parents I love them and I'll see them in heaven. Can I say to all of us, that's great faith? And so we're in the trees and we're celebrating because we think Melanie's been rescued. And from where we were at, we began to count, and what I began to notice was there sure were a lot of kids missing that weren't in trees that we couldn't see. I want to introduce you to another guy. His name was John. If we get that next slide. John was a left tackle on the football team. If I could describe John to you, it would be meekness, power under control. If you see, there's a picture in the bottom left-hand corner. He had a goal in his life to be as big as Lou Ferrigno. The real Incredible Hulk, by the way, not computer generated. So about 2 weeks before we went to camp at a health club in Mesquite, he got to meet Lou Ferrigno. So he's a pretty good-sized fellow. And so we went to camp, and there was a guy. There's always these kids that show up for camp who just come for one reason. Well, really two. Athletics and girls. Come on, can I get a witness? Nothing spiritual. That's just why they show up. They find out who's going. And their week is ruined because they couldn't get one girl's phone number. And there was a kid that showed up for camp that day. His name was to go to camp. And I really didn't think Jeff would go because Jeff broke his leg right before camp playing softball. And I really thought Jeff's not going to go to camp because he can't do anything. But he showed up. And John and Jeff are like good buddies. And every night, Monday through Thursday night, in that open-air tabernacle, that guy and Mike and some other people would go out into the grass outside the tabernacle, and they would pray for their buddy Jeff to come to Jesus. And everywhere that you saw Jeff, this guy right here would have Jeff on his back. Now, Pot of Gold Camp has something that's really crazy. There's 110 steps from the bottom to the top where the tabernacle is. Can you imagine in the heat of July, that guy had his buddy on his back. He carried him everywhere. He carried him to tabernacle. He carried him to lunch. He carried him to supper because he couldn't get around that broken leg. When we got off the bus that morning, that guy right there had his buddy on his back. They got off the bus that way. And over the roar of the water, up in the top of that tree, I hear a voice. Brother Whitey, what are we going to do? And imagine that guy with his buddy on his back. Somehow they made it that far down the river. And that guy right there had his arms wrapped around a tree, holding on for dear life, and then they were gone. They've never found John's body. Ross Perot sent the very best equipment he could send. I got an email one time they found his class ring. But here's what his buddy said with a broken leg. As we went down the river, he pushed me onto a pile of debris, and then he was gone. Jesus said, greater love have no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. We're in that tree, and we thought they're going to be okay. And then there's this kid in the tree. His name was Kevin, and Kevin began to just cry. Kevin went on to Liberty University. Now he just planted a church in North Dallas. Great baseball player, great athlete, was the quarterback of the football team. And he's crying. He said, Brother Whitey, I had your wife, but I couldn't hold on to her. And that was the moment when I felt like, wow, where's LaVonda? I don't know where she's at. I don't know what happened to her. Because everything happened so fast. So fast. And we did something, and I want you to listen to this. Because I believe in the power of prayer, y'all. Because it'd been pouring down rain and pouring down rain and pouring down rain. And I looked at Kevin, because Kevin had surrendered his life to ministry. I said, Kevin, I want you to pray for the rain to stop so they can find us. Because we could hear helicopters. And Kevin didn't pray a deep theological prayer. He didn't pray a very long prayer. He just said, God, let the rain stop and the sunshine come up. And can I tell you, almost immediately, the sunshine came up? Hey, students, don't think you can't pray. I believe God answers prayer. And God's timing. But it was at that moment when I realized that I couldn't find my bride. And she's been gone away from me for 2.5 weeks. I can't imagine what it would be like not to have her forever. She is the rock of our family. And I want her to come, and I want her to tell you what happened to her, and then I'll finish up this story. And she's been sick, y'all, so be merciful.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to please forgive me for coughing because I've been sick, and please forgive me if I cry. I cry ugly. I apologize. But probably this morning I said goodbye to my father. And I probably won't see him again on this earth. I'll see him in heaven. But he has stage 4 lung cancer, and if y'all pray for him, his name is Vernon. So if I'm really emotional, I apologize. But right after the flood, one of the teachers at the Christian school at the church where we were shared a verse with me, 2 verses with me, that have been my verses for my whole life, since the flood and for every moment since then. And it's 2 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Beloved, think it not strange concerning this fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice inasmuch that when his glory shall be revealed, you shall be glad exceedingly. Fiery trials happen to everybody. Sometimes they're watery like ours. Sometimes they're ugly like cancer. But everybody has them. So first of all, I want to share with you my salvation. When I was 4 years old, I went to a church in Kinston, North Carolina called Grace Baptist Church. My mom took us to church. She was the rock of our family. My pastor one Sunday night was preaching on hell, and it was scary. I was only 4 years old, and I remember going down, and my Sunday school teacher took me to a back room, and I remember John 3:16, and and that night I went down only as a 4-year-old, scared to death. I didn't want to go to hell, but not really understanding what Jesus had done for me. Well, later on in our life, we moved to Louisiana, and one Sunday night, my pastor was preaching on heaven, different pastor, different church, and he explained to me what Jesus did for us and how he suffered for us and how without what he did for us, we would go to a place called hell. And I finally understood what Jesus did, and I accepted him into my heart as my Savior. That's a very important part of my story, because without salvation, we're all lost, and we're all helpless and hopeless without that. So what happened to me that day was I was behind Richard in the bus, and I remember looking back like he did and seeing the water coming over the bus, and he told us to get off, and we did. I'm short, so I'm one of the ones Mike held the fence up for so that we could get over the fence. But immediately, I mean, when we first got off the bus, the water was like knee high, and then very quickly it began to rise and got so powerful that, I remember trying to find a lump on the ground to push against the water, but eventually it just pushed you down. And so I ended up at I think the same tree Richard was after we share our testimony with each other, and it was just full of people. There were people in the trees, there were people holding on to the trees, and there were people holding on to people who were holding on to the tree. Everybody was trying to find a place to hold on. Excuse me. So as we were there, and of course the kids were panicked. We were all panicked. We didn't know what to do. And we saw the bus lift up and come our way. And we realized a group of us were on the side of the tree that if we didn't move, we would be crushed by the bus. So we just kind of took it upon ourselves to let go. I didn't know what was going to happen. I think I just thought if I let go, I'll grab onto another tree or another limb. So when I let go, it just shot me down the river. And the same young man that Richard was talking about, Kevin, he grabbed the back of my shirt, and he was on the very end of the limb of the tree. I mean, like this long limb, and people are just holding on. And so Kevin grabbed my shirt. And he held on as long as he could. I held on to him, but eventually, I mean, I'm sliding off the limb, and I realize if I don't let go, I'm going to pull him off. I'm so sorry. So finally, I let go. One reason was because you just couldn't hold on. But another reason was because the water was hitting me in the face so much that I couldn't breathe, and I was taking in water. And I thought if I don't let go, I'm going to drown. So I let go and just gone. I mean, and underwater. And I could feel the water just turning and churning, and it was so powerful. I mean, it was just, I was rolling with the water underneath, and I kept thinking I fought with all I had to come up out of the water. I couldn't come up, and the more I fought, the deeper I went, and the more I felt like I was churning with the water. And then I started taking in even more water, and then things kind of got dark. Like, I thought, am I going to die today? Am I going to drown? And I remember thinking, what will my baby girl do? What will Richard, what will my family? I don't want to die, but I remember so quickly thinking about my family and about losing my life and thinking, I'm going to die. This is it. I never once worried about where I was going to go when I died. Honestly, I had thoughts of heaven. I truly did. And I believe that once you accept Christ as your Savior, you're saved. You're His. And He gives you that security that when you die, you're going to heaven. I don't know about any of you, but before this for me, there would be nights or sermons that I would hear, or nights I would be laying in my bed, and I would be worried about my salvation, and I would think, okay, let's just get it straight. Okay, dear Lord, if I'm not saved, please save me right now. I doubted it, and I let Satan do that to me. That's what, Satan can't have you when you're saved, but he can sure mess with your mind, and he can hinder your testimony. So that happened to me for a lot, but after that day, after the flood, I've never doubted my salvation. I didn't fear where I was going, and I knew I was not going to be here anymore. Well, I gave up, and everything went black. And then the next thing I know, I'm pinned against the debris, and just my head is up out of the water, and I'm trying to get air. I mean, I'm full of water, and I'm just trying to breathe, and I'm just gasping for air, and finally get air, and I realize I'm pinned against the debris, and the water's just hitting me. And I just stayed there. I thought, okay, I'm okay. Somebody's going to find me. I'm going to be okay. And I didn't know where everybody else was. I didn't know what had happened to everybody else. Well, as I was there, I heard these voices on the side of the river, and two of our very good friends who have both passed now, Johnny and Wes, were running up and down the river, and they were trying to find where to tell the rescuers to go and find people. And they kept screaming something at me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Well, finally, one of them just yelled real loud, "Climb the tree." I look over, and I'm right beside a tree. Now, I am not a tree climber. I'm a girly girl. I never climbed. I mean, I think I climbed trees when I was little, but I look over and I think, how am I even going to pull myself up? God gives you what you need when you need it. And I did everything I could, and I fought, and I climbed that tree. and I was proud of myself for climbing that tree. So I found a place in the top of the tree, and I kind of braced my feet between two tree limbs and just sat back and waited. I could hear the helicopters going over. At one point, a helicopter stopped, but I was in an area where there were a cluster of trees, and the debris had piled up in that area, and so that's where I was. So when the helicopters would come over, they would try to drop a line, but they couldn't get it through the trees. But I knew they knew I was there, so I just kept praying. You ever been in a tight spot and you pray that you give God all these promises? If you'll do this, I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I promise I'll do this, and I'll do this every day. Well, I was promising God everything if he would save me. So I sat there, and there were, excuse me, there were bugs and ants and critters and just in my clothes, in my hair. I saw a dead cow go by. I saw a dead deer go by. I just saw, it was yucky and just dirty and stuff all over. And so I just sat there. Well, pretty soon I heard this voice. It was a very faint voice, and it just said, help. And I looked down, and as fast as I looked down, he was gone, and it was Mike, not the Mike Richard was talking about, but another young man in our youth group, and he was gone. And I realized right then how serious this was, not just for me, but for others as well. So as I sat there in the tree, hoping and praying to be rescued, I looked over to the side where the men were who had told me to climb the tree, and there were 4 rescuers with a raft. Now I'm thinking, really? This water's going this fast, this way. They're over here. How are they going to get to me? Rescue workers are amazing. They literally had hooks on the end of a line, and they would throw a hook to a tree and pull to the next tree. Pull, just throw a hook and pull, throw a hook and pull. And so as they were coming toward me, between me and them, they did not know, but I had been watching carefully, was a pile of snakes coiled up. And I'm telling them, snakes, snakes. And they're telling me, settle down, settle down. I'm not, snakes. And I'm screaming. I keep screaming, snakes. They keep telling me, so I know they're saying, well, we got a wild one on our hands. I know that's what they were doing. Finally, they got close enough, and they saw the snakes, and one of the men got a boat paddle and beat the snakes to death. When they got close to where I was, and there was a good bit of distance between me and them, between the debris and where I was, the one guy who came after me, he had a life jacket, and he crawled across the debris, and he kept saying, you don't worry. You wait right there. I'm going to do everything for you. Don't move. And as he got closer, he came with the raft, and he kept saying, don't worry. And I kept trying to help him put the life jacket on, and he kept saying, no, I'll do this. And he did everything, and he buckled me up, and he said, no, you're going to have to follow me over all this debris, and we're going to get in that raft. That's all I had to do was follow him. And when we got to the raft, I fell in, and I thought, I'm okay. I'm okay. How many times in life is that what God wants you to do? He just wants you to follow him. It might be hard, it might be prickly, it might be bad, but he just wants you to follow him, and in the end, it's going to be okay. So I fell in the raft, and I was taken to Kerrville Hospital. And when I got there, they put me in a room, not a semi-private, it was like a 4-person room, and there were curtains between the 4 beds. And so I was laying in the bed, and all I wanted to do was take a shower, but they wouldn't let me take a shower. And so I was watching the news. They had the TVs going, and I was watching the news footage on the TV, and they were scrolling these names over the TV of the people they had found. And I kept looking at that list and looking at that list, and Whitey Koons never came up on that list. And I thought, where's my husband? Well, I start beeping that nurse button, and they'd come in there and say, have you heard about Whitey Koons? Do you know about Whitey Koons? They would say, no, ma'am, I'm so sorry. They'd no more get out that door. I'm pushing that button again. I'm going to find out where my husband is, you know. And so I know I drove them crazy, but so as I was laying there watching the TV, one of the newscasters came on and said, we have confirmed reports that the bus driver, Whitey Koons, has fallen to his death. And for about an hour, I mourned my husband's death. It was a hopeless, helpless feeling. I thought there was nothing to live for. There was nothing to hope for. And if you've ever lost a spouse, my heart goes out to you. There's nothing worse besides a child. So as I was laying there and just mourning my husband, our pastor's wife kind of reminds me of your pastor's wife. She was a bubbly, happy little thing. And she had gone to the hospital, and she was going to all the rooms where some of the kids, where people were, and trying to find them to see who was alive. When she got to my room, she ran to me and she says, "Oh, LaVonda," some people call him Richard, some call him Whitey. "Oh, LaVonda, Richard's looking for you everywhere." And I told her, I said, "No, he's not. He's dead." She's like, "No, he's looking for you everywhere." I said, "No, he's not. He's dead." She's like, "LaVonda, Richard is alive and he's looking for you." And I was like, realized at that time that he was okay. What a relief. But still, I didn't know what had happened to all those children. So my parents came, and we went back, to Bog Springs, and it was a long few days, and waiting for bodies to be found or live kids to be found. But when we got back, and since then, when people might say, "Well, how in the world do you get through something like that?" Well, there's 3 ways that you can overcome tragedy in your life: your family, your faith, and your friends. Your faith being the number one. Make sure that you know for sure that you're saved, that Jesus Christ has saved you and you've accepted him. Make sure of that. And God has a way of comforting you, and he does it through people, through events, through things. He can comfort you. Number 2 is family. If you don't have a good relationship with your family, fix it, because it could be too late really soon. Fix it and have a wonderful relationship with your family. You're going to need them. And then the last thing is friends. I don't know what I would do without amazing friends. Al and Linda are here. They are wonderful friends of ours. They drove 2 hours from Wilkesboro, North Carolina. And good friends are hard to find. So make sure that you have good friends. And there's one thing, teenagers, you can listen to this. There are 3 things about a friend that you should make sure that your friends are VIP friends. Make sure that they verify you, they improve you, and they pray for you. And if your friends don't do that for you, you need new friends. You really do. So I praise the Lord that my husband is alive. We made the right decision with our daughter, and I'm so thankful. I want to go back to the verse. "Beloved, think it not strange concerning this fiery trial which is to try you." Everybody has fiery trials. If you're not in one, you're coming out of one, or you're going into one. Fiery trials are tough, but faith, family, and friends can help you through it. Thank you.
So let me just wrap it up this way. So different than the way LaVonda got rescued, we got rescued by guys. One guy would come down to a tree, and you would sit on his lap, and he would take you back up. Thank God for military people, police officers and firemen that run into the danger, not away from it. And so they would come down, and you would straddle their feet, and so all the guys were out of our tree. And I'll never forget the guy that came down the tree. He was an African-American staff sergeant, and you had to sit on their lap, and you had to hold on. I told you last night I'm scared of heights. Imagine how high that was that day. And remember this. Just get a quick visual and then let it go. Remember, we had taken our jeans off, or some of our jeans that got swept off. And so I thought, now if I'm going to get out of this tree, I'm going to have to sit on his lap. And I'm just going to have to tell you, I ain't never hugged a man like I hugged that man that day. And I said to him, "Sir, if I go, you're going with me. I'm just telling you that." And so they put us in the helicopter, and they took us back first to the local hospital, and then they took us to a classroom. But when I got there, probably about the same time that LaVonda thought that I had passed away, my pastor's wife, I guess it was a little earlier, and my pastor and a couple other adults that had been rescued said, you need to come with us into this hospital room, and you need to identify this body. We think it's Lavonda. And it's one thing to do that and to see that on TV, but to walk into a room and see a body with a sheet is, again, you don't get that in seminary. They don't teach you how to handle that. And everybody said that's Lavonda. And I remember the doctor, the nurse said, do you want something to calm your nerves? And I simply said, if that's her, she's not here. She's already with Jesus. And so they pulled the sheet back about halfway, and I said, yeah, that's her. And maybe it was a shock. I've tried to think about that a lot of times, but I said, that's her. And like Lavonda, for not as long as she anguished, but I thought my wife was gone. And I thought the same thing. Who's going to take care of our little girl? Because, man, we ain't good at it sometimes when it comes to kids. And we met in college, and I chased her really, really hard. And I married way, way up. And she is a rock of our family. And she's been through a tough time these last few weeks. And they said, well, we got to make sure. Has your wife ever had any surgeries? I said, yeah, when she was a senior in high school, she had knee surgery. And so they pulled the sheet back, and the person laying there didn't have any scars. It wasn't Lavonda, but it was that young lady you saw in the water, Melanie. Same body types. And it was at that moment that I realized my life was never going to be different. I'm a youth pastor. I took all these kids to camp. My job was to get them back to Dallas. And before it was all over, the next 2 days, 10 young people went into eternity. 2 sisters, a brother and a sister, and 6 other kids from 6th grade all the way to 12th grade. There were 10 funerals in 7 days. And at the very first funeral, Melanie's dad, who wasn't a believer, put his finger in my chest and basically said, how did you let this happen to my daughter? The only way you get through that is faith, family, and friends. Because that guy that was on the river that was yelling for Lavonda to climb, his name is Wes. He was a pastor. At that time, we were youth pastors. They were the bus behind us. And he came to every single funeral. And after every funeral, I would just collapse into a van, and he would hold me. And I went off and left the Bible that I used to preach with. It was his Bible. At a very young age, he was diagnosed with frontal lobe dementia. And for a pastor, can you imagine losing the ability to talk? And all he could say his last few years of life, all he could say, be blessed. Be blessed. And if I could say anything to all of us tonight, just know this: life is so short. Hug your kids, hold your kids, love your kids. That young lady that I told you about, Legina, who was 16 years of age, the spring in May, before we went to camp in July, we went to a youth rally. Youth events are so important, moms and dads. Legina was one of the sweetest, kindest people. I could tell you a story about every kid that went into eternity. I had the privilege to coach Legina in basketball. She'd gone to Southern Methodist University that summer, and she was voted the MVP of the basketball camp. She was only going to be a junior. She's a phenomenal basketball player. And she went to this youth rally, and the invitation was given, and Melanie went down, or Legina went down to the front. Legina's dad didn't go to church either. Thank God for godly women who bring their kids to church when dad won't do it. Men, be men. Lead your family spiritually. Legina came to the altar, and I went down with her, and she said, I'm not saved. I need to get saved. You see, that was in May, and in July she went into eternity on her 16th birthday. We never know about eternity. If I could say anything to all of us, make sure that we know that our family and friends are going to heaven. Because our story, it's a tough story to tell, but it's our God story. And we said a long time ago, anytime God allows us to share that story, we're going to share that story. Because we think it's important for people to hear about the sovereignty of God, the love of God. And here's the title on the screen, Amazing Grace for Real. We believe it. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Would you stand with me? Every head bowed, every eye closed. You've listened so well. I know it's been a little bit longer than normal. But I would not be doing you any benefit tonight if I didn't ask this one question. If you'd have been in that river that day, if you'd have been fighting for your life, and maybe your life would have been over. See, those 10 kids, it's kind of crazy because that same river, the Guadalupe River, we were traveling 3 hours back to Dallas to go tubing in that river. Those kids had no idea their life was about to be over. So here's the question. And only God knows the answer to this question and you. Nobody else does. I'm not asking, are you a Baptist? I'm not asking, do you go to Putman? I don't care what church you go to, but here's what's important tonight. Do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? If you died tonight, would you be in heaven or hell? And if you're here tonight and you'd say, Richard, I don't have any doubt about where I'm going to spend eternity. If I was fighting for my life on that river, I'd have no fear about where I was going to be that day. And you know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Not based on religion, but a relationship with Jesus. How many would just raise your hand real quick and say, yep, I know that I'm going to heaven. You hold them up just for a second. All over this room, hold them up just for a second. All over this room, hands went up. You can put them down. Maybe you're here tonight and you'd say, Richard, you know what? I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that I'm going to heaven. I can't think of a better thing to happen on a Tuesday night than you to give your life to Jesus. So if you're here tonight, and I believe there's those of you that are here tonight, if you don't know Christ as your personal Savior, if you're not sure where you're going to spend eternity, here's what I want you to do. Just raise your hand for a second and say, hey, that's me, man. I'm not sure that I'm going to heaven. Pray for me. How many like that tonight? You just hold your hand up real quick and say, pray for me. I promise you, I'm not going to come back to it. God bless you. Somebody else, just say, hey, pray for me. Pray for me. I'm not sure that I'm going to heaven. Somebody else. Somebody else. God bless you. Somebody else, pray for me. I'm not sure I'm going to heaven. Somebody else, pray for me. God bless you, sir. Somebody else, just say, hey, pray for me. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm going to heaven. Come on, I believe there's some other folks. Just be honest tonight. God knows your heart. God knows your heart. Anybody else? Just say, hey, pray for me. Hey, if you raise your hand, just do me a favor. I'm not going to come back to it. I want to tell you something tonight. If you just look my direction just for a second, if you raise your hand, know this, Jesus loves you so much that he died for you on the cross. And tonight you can know for sure that Jesus wants you to know that you can have eternity in heaven. Pastor Tom, you'll be here in just a second. I'm going to invite you to come. We're going to sing. I'm going to invite you to come. Other folks, you raised your hand tonight. You said, you know what, I'm saved. Here's what I'm challenging families to do tonight. Moms and dads, here's what I want to challenge you to do tonight. I want to challenge you to gather up your kids. I don't care if they're adult kids. And I want you to come find a place, and I want you to pray with your family. I want you to pray over your family. Maybe you got a husband or a wife, and they don't know Christ, and they don't go to church. You ought to come and spend some time praying for them to come to Jesus. So we're gonna sing. No, we're just gonna play. We begin to play. If you raise your hand, you said, I'm not saved. Listen, I would not leave this place tonight without Jesus.